Hello and welcome to week 5 in the psychology of personality. And as we move away from Freud, we actually move into, we went through the neo-Freudian sort of thing, and we move into the psychology of women because there were a lot of very intelligent, very well-educated women that were very into what Freud was saying. Now, this, of course, will often comes as a surprise in the modern world. Freud spoke very, even in our own terms these days, he was somewhat condescending to women. The fact that we view his statements about women as condescending, yet women still came to him and admired him and wanted to work with him professionally, speaks to how poorly women were actually treated. Freud's view was actually a step up. We have to see this in its historical context. So his view of the psychology of women, even though it has such a negative connotation to it compared to how we feel today, was a step up back then. There was at least a validation of humanity. There was, moving away from women as property. There were members of his inner circle that were women, which was unheard of in the day. So even if we have sort of this backwards 2020 and we say, what a weird time to live, it was actually a very liberating time for many women. Now, of course, they had to contend with where do we go from here? Where do we advance Freud's work? And let's focus some energies on the psychology of women. Now, this is not the psychology of women totality. This is more of a historical point in time in which then later on the actual psychology of women is worthy of a whole other course to bring it to the modern day. But they had to contend with the things that Freud said about what were the major issues and psychological and psychodynamic aspects that were going on in women compared to men. So the researchers of the day really focused on relationships. They focused on sexuality. They focused on those aspects that Freud said were part of the woman's psychology. So we're trying to get our heads wrapped around what did they do to move those ideas forward, and we get some nice personality theories out of this. So in the first discussion, we dive right at it. Freud emphasized that sexuality, the energy that would then in adulthood be mature sexuality for procreation, that energy was central to a developmental path among all human beings. Now, right now, we see in today's world, there's a lot of mixed messages. We become sort of free from the sort of stigmatizing nature of sexuality, depending on age. But it's also, we're still, let me say, in conversations about modern sexuality, I've heard the phrase, it's both the most important thing and the least important thing, and everything in between. So it's like, how do we put a nail on that? How do we, know where sexuality is? Certainly it's not the only aspect of intimacy and relationships, but it's also a very important part. It's a vital part. So let's have that discussion of looking at this through the context of what it was seen then, and this focus on sexuality and trying to get our heads wrapped around the role that plays in mature relationships, and the fact that we still are really struggling with where sexuality is in modern relationships. That's the first discussion. The next is to look at what the psychology of women was doing back then, focusing on two aspects, mutuality and empathy, the emotions that essentially women brought to the relationship with men. Now let's look at that. Let's look at not necessarily just male and female, but in any relationships, the expectation of mutuality and empathy, how has that shaped your personality? Now, there's two examples we can go with this, and I would like to see a balance in this. Sometimes we can look at individuals in our lives, the relationship lacked mutuality and lacked empathy, and that played a part in who we are today. And then there's relationships that we have that were bountiful with mutuality and empathy. In fact, a present relationship, even small ones, even to unrelated people, has often been tagged as a key aspect of resilience when individuals have suffered trauma, particularly early childhood trauma. So people who suffered with early childhood trauma, as long as there was someone in their life where there was mutuality and empathy, that individual often had the ability to survive and thrive despite that trauma. So we're going to take a look at that from your own perspective. How have those relationships made you the person you are today? And then in the quiz, again, focusing on what was going on back then, the sexuality thing that was, and taking a little bit from the first discussion, I'm having you in the quiz discuss that boys and girls experience the maturation of their sexuality in very different ways. And what I want to see is how might this affect their personality? Positively, negatively. In fact, in developmental psych, there's a whole section in my developmental psych class where we talk about early developing boys, late developing boys, early developing girls, and late developing girls, and the expectations and results of those combinations. It would be interesting for some of you to go and do that research and include some of that in this answer, because certainly there's it highlights or really emphasizes, puts a spotlight right on the different lives that boys and girls lead when it comes to their sexual maturity and how that might affect their personality. So that's the historical psychology of women and its effect on personality. Do not take this as the picture of what psychology of women is today. That's a whole division. And so that's it. There's modern perspectives on the psychology of women and feminism and those kinds of things that are rich, that are not included in here. So we're just kind of looking at this again historically as what was the effect of the beginnings of the psychology of women on the viewpoints of personality in the day, and then some applications to what does that mean to us today. So that's what these assignments are all about. So 2 discussions, 1 quiz, just 1 chapter this week. So that is our work ahead of us. So have a great week, be well, and I will see you next time.